on all the different way of implementation of the convention. Summing up, we are really very grateful that this forum is assisting us greatly in preparing for our next special commission and as well for all the work regarding international surrogacy. And we really look forward for the discussions over the 3 next days. Thank you very much.
So now I'd like to invite the chairs of our thematic areas up to introduce those. Would you guys come up? All of you. You can pass the mic around. So we could start with number 1. You can go down the line if you want to line up by number.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Richards, and I am chairing the Children's Best Interests and Implementation session. Children's Best Interests is a term that we use frequently, and sometimes it's taken as self-evident as to what it means, but it can mean different things in different contexts. And my hope for the sessions that we're holding in this stream is that we can provide a space where we can come together and from different perspectives and explore the challenges and opportunities of ensuring that children's interests are foremost in intercountry adoption. And with that aim in mind, we've got sessions and topics that we're going to be exploring children's best interest in the subsidiarity principle and exploring that and its implementation. We'll also be looking at adoptee support, both children and adult, and how we can effectively explore and understand what those needs are and those changing needs are, and how can we can learn more about that. We'll also be exploring how adoptive family support can be experienced. What do we need? What is there available? And how can we ensure that families are supported from the home study stage all the way through to the post-adoption stage? And those what are those experiences? What are that you have that we might explore and bring to the table? We'll also be looking at special needs adoptions, which is an increasing focus on adoptions, and discovering what the challenges there are and what the opportunities are also available, how we might support those adoptions or discover more about those experiences. And finally, we'll also be looking at framing childhood in the convention and generally, and looking at adoptee stories and how they might inform and teach us about the labels that we all use about some of the about adoptees, about orphans, and hopefully having a look at those and challenging some of those assumptions that we all make with those labels and use those labels. And I'm particularly interested in using the stories of adoptees that can challenge and move forward our understandings of what some of those identity labels mean and how effective or how redundant they are. So that's me. So it's a busy week, and I really look forward to getting to know you and hearing your experiences. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. My name is Riitta Högbacka. I'm from Finland, the Department of Social Research, where I teach and am a researcher at the moment, so Finland. I was thinking that if I may, as a way of introduction, I'll quickly just show you 2 brief excerpts from my research, which kind of set the parameters for this thematic group meeting. Well, first excerpt is by an adoptive mother who explained the circumstances leading to her adoption as such. We had been trying for so many years. Getting a child through brought tears to my eyes. Attachment to these children, my husband says as well, attachment comes within 24 hours. Very strong feelings of attachment. It's like getting a lap full of gold. We want to give this child optimal opportunities, everything that it could possibly need. Now, this is the familiar story we all know, getting a child that has nothing and giving it everything. And this is also the family that's echoed in and in between the lines in international conventions. However, there's another story, less often heard, and this is one of the interviews by a South African first mother whose child had been adopted. Not an untypical case that I met, and she described, "So I had to give up the baby. I couldn't bear thinking that I'm bringing this baby to life and she's going to be miserable. And I wasn't going to give her nothing but misery. But I could give her life and then give it to somebody who will give her such a wonderful life, education, everything. It's still hurting so much. I don't know where Juna started teething." So this thematic group is all about trying to shift the focus onto these other families and these other women. And as you've seen from the program, we are also having many joint sessions with other sessions, because this shouldn't obviously be a separate, isolated issue, but should cut through the whole spectrum. So that's why we are looking at, and we are thinking of all the in focus would bring. Some of the topics we will be looking at is subsidiarity, connections within an intercountry adoption context, family preservation issues, and coercion even in situations that might look completely legal and transparent. But of course, there's behind them is structurally induced inequality. So these are some of the issues we will look at. And finally, we are also considering to what extent would the experience and situation of these mothers be similar or dissimilar to women working as surrogates, and we'll be drawing some parallels. So you're most welcome to this thematic area session meetings. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Peter Selman, and the group that I'm in charge of is called Intercountry Adoption Agencies and the Hague Commission. So what I will be doing with the group is very much linked to the two previous groups, and our first two sessions are in fact going to be shared. And I thought it would be useful if I start by just saying a few words that came from The Hague that led us to make the decision to have this particular group. It is that agencies play a very crucial role in terms of linking countries of origin and receiving countries, and also that agencies can be seen as part of the solution but also as part of the problem. And so Laura said, the focus above all else must be how can we ensure that accredited adoption bodies work ethically and in the best interest of child. And that takes us back to the first session. Some of the more specific examples I'll just mention because I think this could be useful for those of you who are going to be in my group, that we're going to look at agency regulations, how we regulate them, how we make them strong, and what their weaknesses are. And above all, to look at issues like transparency, financial arrangements, communication strengths, and a process not only in linking children, but pre-adoption and post-adoption. So we're looking at the preparation of parents, the preparation of children, and the support of children afterwards. And in doing this, I hope that we will have an interesting discussion. The group itself is a mixed one. We have people who are working with agencies, we have people who are from central authorities, we have academics, we have adoptees, and we hope together to share with the previous two groups an awareness of the issues, for example, that Rita mentioned. I think those are the essential things I want to say. But one particular issue that is facing us at the moment is that we are trying to maintain a fairness in terms of the funding of agencies. And at a time when the number of adoptions is going down steadily, but the number of special needs adoptions, which cause particular issues, is going up, how do we ensure that we continue to maintain high standards? And that'll be a very central thing that we will be looking at. And that's linked to the session on special needs, which I'm sharing with Cheryl, and we'll run right the way through. And finally, two things I want to say. Is one is that we are also very acutely aware that we are in a joint conference with those who are interested in surrogacy. And one of the things that's going to be very interesting is to look at the intermediaries that are involved in surrogacy, the people who are at the moment making quite a lot of money, and some of the problems that arise, as you all will have seen from watching the news data on Australia and Thailand. And so we're going to have a joint session between the agency session and the surrogacy, in which we're going to look at the way in which bodies are accredited for adoption, the successes and failures of that, and ask us, is there any way in which we should have something similar in relation? And those are the issues that would have to be addressed, of course, interesting issues that we'll come to later on. So I hope that I'll get to meet you all and get to know a bit later on. There was a quick mention from Laura that my main fate is to be the person who produces numbers. It's easy for me to do this because I come from a country where we do very little inter-country adoption, and we do a large amount of domestic adoption. And we've got controversies there, which I won't go into, but they're building up. And so I'm going to work, I hope everybody's interested in the numbers. Some of my work, which is not original, it's just putting together the numbers that are covered by the Hague, on the Hague Convention inter-country adoption site, and I put some of them also on the Moodle. But if anybody wants to know anything particular about a country they're interested in, do please contact me, and I will be happy to provide more details and statistics for that. In the meantime, I would like to thank Kristen for all her work in setting this up, and the ISS for providing this amazing building for us to work in, and all the support that's being offered by the student volunteers. Thank you for coming, thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to meeting you all in more detail in the next few days. Thank you.
And Peter means that because he gets lots of emails and he always responds. So I'm Karen Smith-Bertabi, and it's a pleasure to be here. I know many faces and actually have been influenced by the research of a number of people in this room, so it's really exciting to be here and be able to talk and learn more. I just wanted to acknowledge our Guatemala contingent. To have such a healthy showing from a low-resource country is fantastic. I was laughing because I'm like, yeah, we're all kind of really connected in deeper ways than I ever anticipated when, as a 23-year-old, I was traveling in Central America and doing some work there. I started there as a Peace Corps volunteer, and Guatemala just is such an amazing place that I spent more and more time there, and I've worked there off and on in research projects. And in the year 2000, I was working there in rural community health, doing development work, as Kristen has been doing, and I was out there doing health promotion in rural primary schools, and I had people approach me and say, "Hey, you have a social work degree. You know, you should start an adoption agency. This is just a lot of money, and you know what you're doing." Yeah, and I had really good connections throughout the country, but I kept looking and going, something's not right. Something's not happening here that's right, because people were leaving with 2 children, unrelated children at once, and you see this in the airport, and there was like 17 children a day at its maximum time period, where they called it the baby flight. These are the morning flights leaving Guatemala. And it was very compelling for me to start asking myself, it's a crossroads moment, because I joke, I could have become an adoption millionaire, and there were plenty of people who were in Guatemala and became millionaires, or I could begin a research agenda. And so that was 14 years ago, and here we stand, and we have Norma here, who I've had an opportunity to work with, which is just amazing. We have our Central Authority folks. And since we're on the subject of Guatemala, I want to tell you that I've given our track Force, Fraud, and Coercion the title, and that actually comes out of international private law related to human trafficking, the Palermo Protocol. And I think that I'm very sad to say that Guatemala probably is the most notorious case example of force, fraud, and coercion at this point in terms of large scale. Now, we could have all kinds of arguments about which countries are which, because I know that we have our Koreans here that feel very strongly about some of these issues too. But really am interested in starting to look at that deeper, and even what does the term child abduction mean? I think that we actually have more child abductions than we've actually identified. We call lots of different kinds of acts, different things, but maybe more of child abduction than we even realize. And Norma has worked very diligently on that, and I really appreciate the fact that she's here. So we're going to look at that, and then we're going to bridge over to surrogacy. What have we learned from intercountry adoption? What do we know about consent processes? Can you even really have informed consent in the context of deep poverty? Because we know that poverty is an oppressive condition in which my ability to consent as a woman is really different and privileged than it is when you're so impoverished that you're trying to eat or feed your children tomorrow. And so can we have informed consent? And, you know, where's this level playing field? Because there's this whole media idea around win-win, and the stakes are very high. So really interested in that. I've actually engaged recently in a research agenda in global surrogacy. Now we've collected some interviews in India, so I'm really excited to get to know the folks that bring their research on surrogacy. So we're going to pull all of this together in a bit of a hybrid in our track, because we're going to move from what do we know about intercountry adoption and the problems to what's going to happen, and if there is a new convention, where are the bridges? And then what are the differences? Because there are some very real differences. So I think it's going to be a very challenging track, and I'm really excited to have everybody here.
Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I do want to start with some thanks. Thanks to the ISSS for this wonderful opportunity and this wonderful facility and all the staff support, to Kristen for pulling everything together, and to the other members of the organizing committee here. The 3-hour meetings across 9 time zones that Kristen mentioned were challenging, but also rewarding. And the whole idea of organizing a big conference across an ocean with people I had never met before, you know, it was kind of a leap of faith, and one that I feel really glad that I made. And I hope that you feel the same way. I want to also thank all of you for coming, for being here to consider these issues. And I don't know if there has been another meeting where the issues of intercountry adoption and cross-border surrogacy have been joined like this. And I think we have so much to learn from each other, as Karen just said, about the similarities and about the differences. Did I say my name is Marcy Darnowski. I'm the chair of the surrogacy track or thematic area here. My organization is the Center for Genetics and Society. We're a small public interest organization based in Berkeley, California, and we work on a range of issues connected to human genetic technologies and assisted reproductive technologies. And we come at this range of issues from a perspective that is centrally grounded in social justice and in human rights. And so the concerns that we have, and that many of us share about commercial surrogacy and specifically cross-border surrogacy, are very much implicated in those concerns about social justice and human rights. And we want here to really surface all those concerns and to find, even among our own track, the people in our own track, to really explore where we agree, where we think that we can identify common concerns and common approaches to addressing those concerns. And also we want to surface the differences that we may have among ourselves, and to, in a respectful way, really explore what those differences, what the implications of those differences are for moving forward. We're going to be doing that kind of overview of the range of issues first, and I think that's in part because the issues of cross-border surrogacy are at a very different stage in the development of our understanding than are the issues concerning intercountry adoption. We don't have numbers like Peter has. No one can tell you how many arranged cross-border surrogacy arrangements have been made, how many children are the result of them. We just don't know. And there's so much we don't know, and we need to know. So one of the things that we'll be doing is identifying areas for additional research, and also possible ways in which members of our thematic area and perhaps with members of the other thematic areas may move forward in research, in advocacy, in policy advocacy. Those are all on the table, as well as the charge that we have to produce a working paper, a report that will, we hope, helpfully inform the Hague conference. And I think this gathering is different from many other kinds of the conferences that many of us go to, in that we have that tangible policy possibility, that outcome of being able to inform the deliberations of a group that may actually be able to move forward towards an international agreement that will have real effect on the world. And we also will be wanting to explore other avenues and other possible collaborations among ourselves. So let's see. I guess the only other thing that I wanted to say is that I think that I speak for many of the people who have focused on surrogacy in saying that we have a lot to learn from those who have focused on intercountry adoption. And we're really looking forward to that. And again, want to thank everyone who's made this opportunity possible for us. Thanks.
Thanks, you guys. So, you'll have opportunity, of course. Now you have faces and names. Please feel free to come up to chairs and ask more questions. And I hope that you have wonderful deliberations in your sessions. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our first keynote speaker, and that is Mr. Hans van Loon. Mr. Van Loon, Hague Convention on the Protection of Children, Country Adoption, or what we call for short the Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoption. In his capacity as Secretary General of the Hague Conference from 1996 to 2013, he continued to strengthen this and other Hague Conference conventions on children's rights. Mr. Van Loon now works as an independent consultant, having left the Hague Conference, and recently served as a visiting professor at the Xiamen Academy of International Law in China. So please welcome Mr. Hans van Loon.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm delighted and honored to be with you this morning. Many of you I have known for quite a long time in some cases, and many faces are new to me, so I hope we have an opportunity to exchange views. I was asked to introduce to you the Hague Convention on Protection of Children and Cooperation in Respect of Intercountry Adoption of the 29th of May, 1993. With me in this room is Dr. William Duncan, CMG, formerly Deputy Secretary General of the Hague Conference, and before that, a long-time Professor of Law in Dublin, Trinity College, and a member of the Irish Law Reform Commission. And William Duncan contributed to the convention in many ways. First, as a delegate of Ireland, he brokered many compromises and found solutions. And then, as Deputy Secretary General of the Hague Conference, he developed a whole range of tools and activities to support the convention. He did so with the support of a wonderful team that included Laura Martinez-Mora, our principal legal officer, who continues his work. And her team is, as she mentioned, also conducting research on the legal aspects of surrogacy with Hannah Baker. Where's Hannah? There's Hannah. And Sandra Dupuis. Where's Sandra? Sandra is in charge of the technical assistance program that supports the implementation and application of the convention. And she brings very important experience from Burkina Faso and Haiti. All four of them have offered to assist me in responding to the questions that you may have after my introduction. I should say that one of our team is not here, Ignacio Goicoechea, who some of you may know. He is the Hague Conference's representative for Latin America and has done great work, is doing great work also in this field of intercountry adoption, including in Guatemala. I'm delighted to welcome to see the delegation from Guatemala here. The convention, or treaty, same word, multilateral treaty, now has 93 states, parties. It's about protection of children in the specific context of intercountry adoption. It applies to the cross-border adoption of children where at the outset the prospective adoptive parents live in one country and the child in another country. Different states. So let me first make a few comments on two keywords, the noun adoption and the adjective intercountry. The convention is about intercountry adoption. Now, adoption is an age-old institution. You find references to it already in the Code of Hammurabi in the 17th century before Christ. And it's practiced around the globe with the exception of the Islamic countries. It's not a uniform concept. Broadly speaking, there is full adoption, there is simple adoption. In the case of full adoption, the child acquires family ties with the adoptive family equivalent to biological ties, and all the ties with the original family get lost. With simple adoption, the child retains ties with the biological family. Now, what distinguishes adoption, both full and simple, both covered by the 1993 Convention, from institutions such as guardianship, kafala, Islamic equivalent, functional equivalent, and foster care, is that adoption establishes a legal parent-child relationship between the child and his or her adoptive parents. Guardianship, foster care, kafala do not create such a legal parent-child relationship. They are not covered by the Convention. They're covered by another instrument of the Hague, very important Hague Convention on Protection of Children. Now, guardianship and foster care and kafala may, as alternative forms of childcare, serve some of the same social functions of adoption, but they are legally distinct. And that's important, for one thing, because consent to a guardianship or kafala or foster care should not be taken as a consent to adoption. The Adoption Convention, in several of its articles, provides very detailed mandatory requirements for informed, freely given consent by the birth parents and others, and for very good reasons. Abuses of consent have been, unfortunately, and still are, common, particularly in cross-border situations. There are currently, for example, disturbing reports about consents given to guardianship by birth parents in Uganda, for example, and that is then used as a way of funneling children into intercountry adoption. Consent to guardianship is not consent to adoption, and certainly not to intercountry adoption. So much on adoption. A word on intercountry. The 1993 Convention is about intercountry adoption. Now, in our age of globalization, cross-border family relationships, marriages, inheritance, maintenance, they are quite common. And the Hague Conference has drawn up a number of conventions to deal with to ensure continuity of such relationships across borders. And normally, the cross-border movement is in two directions. People move from A to B, country A to country B to marry there, and they move from country B to country A to marry there. But in the Convention, intercountry refers, in fact, mainly to the adoption of children from certain countries in certain other countries, of children from developing countries, south to Western countries, often implying complete change of the child's physical, socioeconomic, and cultural environment. That was the reality when the Convention was conceived and born in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's in essence still today's reality. And this flow of children in one direction reflects, to a large extent, the gross inequalities of living conditions existing on our planet, with demographic, economic, social, legal, political aspects. I'm going in the wrong direction, sorry. A few words about the purpose and nature of the Convention. The Convention does not and could not possibly deal with the root causes of this one-way move, of this migration of children involved in international adoption, but it does seek to combat and prevent the abuses to which it has led and its other adverse effects which result from the structural supply of children available for adoption to other countries and the structural demand for such children in economically developed countries. We use that language, supply and demand, which is derived from economics, of course, to characterize the context of intercountry adoption. And that is for good reasons. But we must not forget that intercountry adoption is also about solidarity, goodwill, compassion, love in both directions, from the child to the parents and the parents to the child, and it's about giving unique family, unique chances in lives for children. Indeed, the Convention sets up protective legal and cooperative frameworks within which children may safely find a new home abroad with new development opportunities and new life perspectives. If it were not so, we should have abolished intercountry adoption. We have created a framework within which we hope that positive things may happen. The Convention specifically aims at preventing the abduction, kidnapping, sale of and trafficking of children, and thereby protect. It's not only the child, but also the birth parents. Very important. In addition to fight these manifest abuses, the Convention puts brakes on all too lightly arranged cross-border adoption. There where intercountry adoption is the best alternative. Convention promotes careful preparation and careful arrangements of the adoption to ensure that the adoption is in the best interest of the child. It's not premature, well prepared. So that there will be maximum chance of working out successfully. The child may enter and reside permanently in the receiving country and states. Now, the Convention establishes minimum standards. Those minimum standards are mandatory, but nothing prevents states from adding safeguards, procedures, make them more strict. And there's no obligation, of course, under the Convention to send children abroad. That should be clear, of course. One of the novel and principal novelties of the Convention is that it integrates two procedures which used to be separated. In the old days, without a convention, you had an adoption procedure, usually in the country of origin, which was totally or partly ignored in the other country, so that it had to be redone all over again with a new probationary period, etc. And also, very importantly, no guarantee that the transfer of the child from country A to country B would be allowed. The Convention integrates these two procedures into a one-step, one procedure. Two countries are jointly responsible for the adoption and for the transfer of the child from the country of origin to the receiving country. I remember from the days of the Romanian adoption rush that it happened, not once but several times, that a child was adopted in Romania, for instance, by a couple from the UK, and then the family ties with the original family were cut off. The child was considered by the Romanians as a child of the new family, but the UK authorities had a different view, and then the child ended up in a legal limbo. So this joint responsibility of the two states, which they cannot escape, is essential to an understanding and to the functioning of the Convention. A word on the genesis of the Convention. How did it come about? After all, there were already in place a Hague Convention of 1965, private international aspects of intercountry adoption, and an Inter-American Convention. But the problem with both instruments was that they had been negotiated with a regional set of problems in mind and among a more limited number of countries and with a very traditional approach in terms of private international law techniques. So neither of these instruments had attracted more than a few contracting states. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War had broken out, leading to a new wave of adoptions, and more importantly, at the end of the 60s, huge demographic changes happened in the West and in the North and in the South. Birth rates started going down very rapidly in the West and going up in developing countries. And there was already at the time, in the late 80s, quite considerable concern about inter-country adoption. Countries closed off and prohibited adoption. So it was already, the notion of inter-country adoption began to become a doubtful one. So what was needed was a global perspective with an open eye to these concerns and global participation of states that were involved, stakeholders, and a novel approach that emphasized more the need for cooperation and clearly set the objectives that would be needed for this new convention. Now, some said that that's far too big a job for the Hague Conference. Why don't you go to the UN? The fact was that the UN had tried but had failed. The UN faced the opposition of Muslim countries, which generally, there are exceptions, generally do not allow for adoption in their laws, and they made it difficult for the UN to end up with a binding convention. So their work finished with a non-binding declaration of principles, 1986. Important, but not binding. The Hague Conference was in a different situation. At the time, we had few Islamic countries, and we had the institutional flexibility to be selective in the countries that we invited to the negotiations. Moreover, the conference had an expertise which the United Nations lacked. It had a know-how to establish, through multilateral treaties, machinery for direct cross-border cooperation, not at the top level, but among subunits of states, administrative bodies, central authorities, and courts. And it had the experience of monitoring and servicing such treaties. An important forerunner in this regard was the Hague Child Abduction Convention of 1980. So that know-how was a plus, and our way of carefully preparing of conventions was a plus, as was the openness towards professional organizations and stakeholder groups. And I would like to mention in this regard another ISS, International Social Service. Mr. Hervé Boéchat is representing ISS, and Defense for Children, represented at the time by Nigel Cantwell, who was also with us and also participated in negotiations. So we managed to get on board a number of countries. Latin America was terribly important because they had been facing, in the middle of the 70s, a sudden demand for children, and were fully unprepared for that. So it was important to bring them on board. And then barely had the negotiations started, or we saw on television, newspapers, the images of children in Romania in appalling circumstances. And the outrage and compassion led many people from the West to go to Romania to adopt a child, which led to an adoption rush. I think these were the words of the UNICEF representative at the time there, because Romania was perhaps even less prepared than Latin America was to cope with that. So that led to unprepared abuses, unprepared adoptions, abuses, aggravated by, in some cases, not so subtle diplomatic pressure from countries in the West. And that gave an unexpected urgency and impetus to the negotiations in The Hague. And speaking for myself, my own engagement, I had as a secretary then the practical responsibility for the negotiations. My own engagement benefited, was greatly deepened when I had the privilege of taking part in a few missions, first to Romania and then to Albania and also to Bosnia and Croatia, sponsored by UNICEF and International Social Service and in part by UNHCR. And I'm still enormously grateful to Nigel because he made it possible for me to take part in these missions that really influenced my perspective, and I learned a lot from that. A great help to the negotiations was the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was completed in 1989, and which not only defines certain policy objectives, but also encourages states to conclude international agreements. That was an encouragement for states to take part in the negotiations at The Hague. And since then, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which receives reports from contracting states of the UN Convention, has encouraged systematically states parties to join the Hague Convention. So they have been our PR to a certain extent. Some of the challenges we faced, I can't deal with all of them, of course. Subsidiarity was an important one. In the beginning, the idea that preference should be given to placement of the child in the country of origin, which we now call the subsidiarity principle, was not accepted by all states. That was one of the issues where we benefited from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, because that convention clearly emphasizes that point. The convention, the Hague Convention, reinforces it by making subsidiarity a mandatory consideration for every adoption under the convention, which doesn't follow logically necessarily from the UN Convention. The role of accredited bodies was a point of concern. Latin American countries came to us and said, what do all these private agencies do? We want to deal with governments, we want to deal with states, we don't want these agencies. Now the reality was, of course, that in the West, private citizens had become concerned, started offering their homes to children and had organized themselves in these organizations. So historically and de facto, there was a role for them. And in the end, the Latin countries accepted that you could not ignore them. And a role was given to these accredited bodies, but under strict rules and with supervision and the rest of it. One of the important things that we could not we could not legislate, of course, legislate for all countries in the world. So special commissions, already mentioned later on, defined, added to, that has been repeatedly stressed, namely that countries that are parties to the convention should apply the convention also in the relation to non-contracting states. So countries like Nepal, Russia, Ukraine, Republic of Korea, Ethiopia, and Uganda, which are not yet parties, unfortunately. Countries that are parties should try to apply this. At the time we prepared our preliminary report in 1990, as I mentioned at the beginning, intercountry adoption had been banned in some countries already and was heavily criticized by others. Had the convention not seen the light, had it not received the broad support and confidence which it has from countries of origin, then most likely intercountry adoption would have probably fallen into complete disrepute. Many more countries of origin would have closed off, and others would have become simply the playground for unlimited commodification of children. The convention restores control by countries of origin over the placement of children abroad. It gives them the legal instrument not only to agree or to refuse every individual adoption, but also to be selective with regard to the agencies with which they want to deal or the countries with which they want to deal. And that is the explanation why the convention has attracted so many countries of origin. 2/3 of the states parties now are countries of origin. The convention has had a very important impact within countries of origin, has stimulated the implementation of the continuum of childcare idea, including domestic adoption programs. It's very unfortunate that we don't have detailed statistics on this, but Brazil, Chile, and some other countries are examples where we've seen that as a result of the convention, domestic programs for in-country adoption have gone up. And UNICEF and International Social Service and other organizations have done a fantastic work to stimulate that development. There remain enormous challenges, of course, and Laura and Sandra, I guess, will speak about that. More generally, the Convention has led to more awareness of good, bad, and dubious practices in both countries of origin and receiving countries. What is the future? I'm going to it's not so easy, the future. Now, as political, economic, and social changes, the factors in countries change, the pattern of inter-country adoption and adoption also changes. It was to be expected, for example, that with greater political stability and rising living standards in Latin America, many young, healthy infants would now find a home in Latin America, and that has happened. So, worldwide, inter-country adoption increasingly tends to benefit older and handicapped children, siblings, the difficult to place, the special needs children already mentioned. That requires education, special preparation of prospective parents, and specialized services to assist them. So more awareness is needed on that point. There's no future, in my view, for inter-country adoption if it's not firmly based on the idea of the continuum of childcare. The Convention, properly implemented, necessarily requires review and reinforcement of the domestic childcare infrastructure for homeless children and children at risk. That respect, the technical assistance program developed by the Hague Conference is of critical importance and deserves our common support. One of the pitfalls to avoid is undue bureaucratization. Checks and balances are required. Serious efforts must be made to locate, to identify birth parents, but this should not be done at the cost of letting children languish for years in institutions. Africa has become the new frontier. 2 years ago, Laura and I participated in the African Child Policy Forum in Addis Ababa. That conference noted that Africa was the only continent where inter-country adoption is on the increase, and that only 14 African states had ratified the Hague Convention. Since 2012, 2 states in Africa have joined the Convention, Lesotho and Swaziland. That's not good enough. A much more energetic effort is needed on the part of African states to speed up their political decision program, being well understood, of course, that the Convention does not oblige them to introduce adoption into their domestic system. As long as these states stay out of the Convention, they are depriving themselves from the tools to control inter-country adoption, and they do not benefit from the assistance programs created to promote the Convention. In conclusion, the future of the Convention is deepening its contribution to the building of a global infrastructure aimed at providing families to homeless children, based on the idea of the continuum of childcare. Try to keep the child with the family. If it's separated from the family, reunify it with the family. Try to find a solution within the country, and if that is not possible, consider inter-country adoption. Only within that framework, inter-country adoption has a future. Thank you for your attention.
Sure, if they'd like to. We have a lot of time then for questions. I'm sorry, I was pushing a little bit, Hans, to finish up because we wanted to be sure that we do leave a lot of time for discussion. So we have a couple of students here in red, and if people have questions, they can bring a microphone to you, and you can answer. If you have questions or comments, you can start the discussion by taking a mic, if you will. And Hans will stay here to answer questions. If you want other people to come.
Yes, but as I said, I rely on William and Laura and Hannah and Sandra and perhaps Nigel was also a participant in the negotiations and contributed a lot to them to join me in answering your question. It was very much a collective effort, of course.
Good morning. My name is Shri Mure. I'm from Canada, from Memorial University. I am Thank you for the overview about the convention itself and the work that has been done by the Convention on Intercountry Adoption. My question relates to monitoring and how it actually implements. What teeth does the convention have in making sure that the countries actually adhere to the convention? Does it have any method of putting pressure other than moral pressure on the countries?
Laura, would you care to? Laura is in charge now of that that aspect.
Thank you. I think he has been for many years my great teacher, and I have always been grateful to be working with Hans, William, Nigel. With Nigel, I did my first mission in Ukraine, 2005, I think it was. So yeah, we have great memories in a country is having difficult times. Going back to the question, well, I think Hans could answer. It's something that we have been thinking about a lot regarding monitoring. How can we ensure that states are really applying in a good way the convention? Some may think, or should we have a court? Should we have a tribunal who is telling us, well, this doesn't work, you should do this and that. This is something that we prefer to take another approach and take a preventive approach. We very much believe on the need of preventing the problems, on working with the states that want to become a party to the Hague Conference, give some legal advice, give some training, share experiences, and as well there is also the role of controlling between states parties. So if a state is having problems, they can ask to another state, but if a state of origin sees that a receiving state is not taking well care of the children or something, they can say, well, I don't want to work with that state. And inversely as well, if a receiving state is seeing that in a state of origin the guarantees of the convention are not being applied, there is also the way of saying, well, should we stop for a moment and try to resolve the problems before continuing? The issue of having a special court or tribunal, it was discussed in a previous special commission, and it's something that will be really costly to have all set up, all this structure, and it will be really difficult. Just see at our level, I said that we are 3 people working in adoption, so that's less than 2 people and a half. And even if you put it more specifically, under our regular budget, there's less than 1 person in total working for this, because the other, Sandra, is working on a supplementary budget. So we even don't have the funds for more than 1 person working on this. So how can we think about a structure like this? And I think more importantly, and that was something that we were discussing with William in detail, because we had this question at the time, is really let's try to prevent, let's try to work with states. It's also this question that it's parting becoming, but having states which are party but that have also the capacity of changing their legislation, and as well training and having the different authorities in place. So I think it's an important role on that.
Just to add on this, I mentioned in the beginning that the convention cannot possibly resolve the underlying issues, the context, which is the root cause of why children move from the south to the north. So that's beyond the control of the convention anyway. The politics that come to it, the corruption, and that yet is the context in some countries of how the convention operates. Within that context, the convention does, as we said, give control to countries of origin to keep an eye on what's going on. And the fact that the convention is based on cooperation, as Laura pointed out, builds in a sort of automatic monitoring monitoring, because central authorities of all the countries are in daily contact with each other and will constantly remind each other of their duties under the convention. So that's very important. And then you have the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which receives reports from countries and will from time to time point to certain defects in the operation of the convention. Still, all in all, I think the convention has done a great deal to raise standards, and there's much more that could be done. For instance, if these special commissions were not taking place every 5 years, but every year, which in my view they should, but that's the question of funding, for instance. And of course she would need a much larger staff to run that.
Hi, my name is Deepa, and thank you very much for the presentation. And my question in some ways is related to what Shri just raised, and just a couple of things. One, as the UN conventions goes, there is a process within countries where you have civil societies providing shadow or alternative kind of reports, which in some ways is also monitoring within domestic circles, and puts pressure on the state to comply with certain conventions or covenants. So I was wondering if there is such a process within, the HCIA. Also, you mentioned an office for Asia Pacific in Hong Kong. So I would really, if there is time, either within the session or outside, to know more about it and what its functioning is, and if people in or organizations in the Asia Pacific region can kind of engage with that body. Thanks.
But to answer your first question, long ago the UN made a report on how the Hague Conference, among other organizations, operated. And the way we work was characterized as highly structured and open. So not only in the implementation of the convention, the Hague Conference uses mechanisms, as you mentioned, from the civil society, but also in the course of the preparation of the conventions and in the negotiations, the Hague Conference is a very open policy to allow stakeholders, according to certain criteria, of course, and professional organizations, civil society organizations to be there. And I must say that in this particular example of the intercountry adoption, organizations like DCI, ISS, Terre des Hommes have had a considerable impact and educational influence on the negotiators. It's been a collective learning process. As to perhaps the Hong Kong office.
Just to add something a bit more, we also think it's very important, this type of forum, or personally I also think it's very important when we have the chance to do some missions to meet all the different actors, not only the ones working on this, but the true actors like adoptees, families, birth families, adoptive families. So really try to listen to the different people. It was for me very interesting being before the summer in a conference in Italy with adult adoptees. It was only organized by and for adult adoptees. I can only attend a part of it because the discussions were in some cases only from them. And it was very good to have their opinion on saying how they see things. Do they know about this treaty? On this kind of thing. So I think it's very important. Regarding the Hong Kong office, it was created was the end of 2012. And so it's quite new. Specifically on intercountry adoption, we have been working with Cambodia, and we did a mission with the representative last year to train the judiciary. But before that, there have been Asia-Pacific forums between the different countries in Asia-Pacific, not only to study the 93 Hague Convention, but other Hague Conventions. And at that, you had different actors, not only central authorities, but judges and different actors of the different conventions. And we have more experience with the one of Latin America. That was there since 2005, and with Ignacio, we had the chance to go and provide technical assistance to Guatemala and some other countries in the regions here. is mainly now in Honduras, seeing if Honduras is going to accede or not to the convention. So the main focus of this, of having this regional office, is having somebody from the region, so they know the region better, and he can have a more flexible and very direct contact with the different central authorities and different actors, so he can participate in different events and really exchange and take into account this point of view. It's very important, for example, for special commissions. In the last one, you really see the Latin American group meeting all the time together and having a strong position. For example, there's a recommendation saying that prospective adoptive parents should learn a bit about the language of the country where they are going to adopt. And this conclusion recommendation was adopted because the Latin American group really pushed for it and say, well, if we have some people that do not know Spanish and they come and now children are older children, they should learn a bit. And this is something because all the states of origin got together, and this is something that was also helped by the Latin American office.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Silvia Nambiri Mukasa from Uganda. Thank you so much for the presentation, which is very informative. And I think the convention really gives us the structure in which to protect the children. But I just want to know from you, especially from the Hague Conference, given that you are looking at the supporting the countries, especially that are mainly sending, to continue having protection over their children. I'm borrowing from the example of my country, where currently the sending is, the numbers are so high in Uganda, and we have not yet ratified the convention on intercountry adoption. So what kind of support do you provide to these nations or countries to encourage them to ratify and to show them the benefits like we've seen them here? Because when you present, you really see the benefits of ratifying the convention. So what kind of advocacy, what kind of approach and support are you providing to these countries to ensure that they quickly ratify and become part of the state parties so that they can become accountable, especially that most of these countries have already ratified the Children's Convention. Why not also ratify these other enabling conventions? So we'd like to know how you are doing it and maybe the process and the challenges so that we can know how to proceed. Thank you.
We'll answer your question in a moment, but there's also political will, of course. The government must decide. The government must make it up its mind and take a decision that it wants to go ahead with the convention. And only if that political will is there, then we can help and support.
Yeah, I fully support what Hans just said, and in fact, in practical terms, the first thing that we need in order to move or to assist a country is a letter from the government requesting technical assistance. So that's the first very important. If we don't have this, it cannot be from, it can be side that's really active, is really answering emails, is really possible to make it. And then the key question, usually in the past what we have done is if this request, and if we have funding, because that is also another issue. If we have the funding, then we may go to that country and we may provide a first mission where we will see what's to ensure that the domestic legislation is really in accordance with the convention. So we may have make some recommendations regarding that. To start doing some training and going forward, it's also important to know who is doing what. Our experience has shown us that in the past we started doing some training, but the legislation was not passed. And then 1 year later, the legislation was passed, and the people who we had trained were not anymore responsible. So we had to start from zero again. So we need to have some legal background there to say, okay, this is the authorities who are working to work on this. This is also very important. And when doing all this, we may at one point, us or in company as well with the International Social Service, with Hervé, with Nigel, do some of the missions. We have done that in Haiti as well in the past, but we also believe a lot in the experience from other states in the region. So try to get the experience from another state which may have similar situation and can really share their point of view. Like this, there is not, if it's a receiving state coming and say, well, you should do this, 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 it can be helpful, but it can also have this, say, okay, I'm helping you, but then when you have children, you should give a kind of preference to us. When this kind of assistance is given from state of origin to state of origin, there is not this second thought, possibility of this second thought. I also have to make a parenthesis here. It's not, I want to make this very extensive, but as I explained, our organization, the main aim of our organization is to draft treaties. Technical assistance has been developed afterwards with the lead of William and Hans, so it was really their idea to have this technical assistance and work with states of origin. We have had lots of criticism from our member states, from our states, which they say our main aim should be drafting treaties. And so we are facing a difficult stage regarding the finance of this type of mission, and as well we have now stricter criteria. So in order to be able to receive some kind of technical assistance, we have to prove, for example, that there is a problem in the country, the numbers of inter-country adoptions, the number of states, parties which they work with. So we have some selection and prioritization criteria that we have to apply. But I think if you want technical assistance, the first thing is to have this request, and then we will try to manage and get these other political and bureaucratic issues that we have to discuss with our member states. But our will is there. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Hedva Eyal, and I'm from Israel. And my question is, how do you deal with the changing concept of what is a family, according to inter-country adoption? As much as I know, only heterosexual family can adopt, can be part of this regulation, and as I see it, it's make a new path of surrogacy for homosexual couple, homosexual family, choosing the path of surrogacy because they don't have the adoption as an opportunity. And also, this is one of the things. The other thing is the concept of what is a family. We talk about commitment, responsibility, and this is concept of, as I see it, as a new family. Okay, this is my question.
I'm not 100% sure I got your question, but I would first of all leave out surrogacy at the moment. The question whether a homosexual couple could adopt or not is basically not a question that is answered by the convention. There was discussion about it, but my own view is that if the country of origin and the receiving country both agree that a homosexual couple, married or not, can adopt, then why should you not make the convention available to that adoption? Both stakeholders, principal involved states, are in agreement with that. The concept of family is not defined by the convention. It's a universal convention. It applies to all countries in the world, and the definition of what family is basically left to each state. But what I would say is that the convention, by using the word family, refers to that the structure in countries which are able to give a home to a child, however they define it. So we are not going to get children out of a family because from a Western point of view, for instance, that family is not considered to be a family in our views because it's not a nuclear family. And that's important in many developing countries where there used to be, and still are, but less so, broad extended families who can give a home to a child, even if that is not a nuclear family in our Western concept. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Laura Briggs from the U.S. And I was curious about the last slide. Thank you all for very interesting presentations. But the last bullet point on the final slide said the purpose of the ICA is to provide families for homeless children. And I wanted to ask you to think out loud about the ways that finesses most of the key terms that different parties disagree about, right? What constitutes a homeless child? Many children are placed before they're born. And are institutionalized children homeless because their birth families are not with them? Similarly, so all the contesting parties, the intermediaries, those who are advocating less intercountry adoption, those who are advocating more intercountry adoption, are struggling over precisely those terms, right? Which families, birth families or potential families within countries, potential families outside of countries? So I wonder how you think about how the treaty deals with those conflicts.
Well, we'll try to understand each other. Let's just make it. The treaty is based on cooperation between the country of origin and the receiving country, isn't it? And the essential control over which children should qualify for intercountry adoption under the convention is left to the countries of origin. They decide when it is good for the adoption to proceed. Under the convention, they have a duty to look for a permanent family solution for the child, do their utmost to find that. And they need, of course, the support and the solidarity of the receiving countries, but basically it's their decision to make sure that they find, first of all, a home for a child within the country. And how they define that home is according to their own standards in principle. If they have a society with extended families, then they would look around to find a solution within that extended family for the child before deciding to send the child to another country. Is that going into direction?
Well, that's where the fight is, right?
The fight between whom?
The fight between local activists, international activists, the ways that markets operate to put a lot of money into making certain kinds of placements lucrative and other kinds of placements not lucrative.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like those are the contested terms. And saying that we want to find families for homeless children does nothing to mediate those conflicts.
Oh, but it's not a question of what we want this or we want that. There is an international obligation now under the convention to structure this process. There is a duty for the countries of origin to do their best to find a home for children. It's not.
At the same time, they're pressured to deliver. Even if the state parties won't member of the Hague Convention, they stay. And also countries they say we feel pressured by our member states to deliver.
That's undeniable. Yeah. But that's undeniable. But there would be far more pressure even if they did not have the convention. The convention is not a solution.
It's a discussion, because it's not proven that it's right at the same time.
Well,
the Hague Convention will prevent more deliverance.
Well, some would heavily be in disagreement with you because they point to the convention and they say all the numbers are going down. Anyway, let's not go into that sort of thing. I think it's difficult to contest that 2/3 of the countries that are parties to the convention are countries of origin and that they have made on their own move this step, cumbersome step to join the convention, set up a structure, often insufficient, but set up a structure to implement the convention and have regained to a certain extent, some more, some less, control over what happens to their children. If you say, well, we were better off without a convention, be my guest, but I think there many countries, including, first of all, many countries of origin, would not agree. Is there not much more to be done? Certainly, I'm the first to admit it. As I said, that there should be much more, much bigger machinery to reinforce the mechanisms of the convention, to assist countries of origin, to help them setting up an efficient system. The resources are not available, and I'm the first to regret it and to try and think of ways to improve that. But I think the basic infrastructure is sound, and we need to build on it rather than criticize it. It has the potential of doing good work, and in some countries the picture has changed completely. The countries of origin have become receiving countries with assistance of others.
Kia ora. My name is Rhoda Sherman. I'm from New Zealand. I'm a researcher. I don't work with the central authority, so forgive me if this question or this answer is already known to people. Hans, you said on your slides that there's a minimum standard that's expected through the convention. If central authorities go beyond this and perhaps have more innovative ways of approaching the convention, do they communicate with each other? Is there a mechanism by which central authorities share ideas? And in intercountry adoption, for instance, parents are often encouraged to have play dates with other adoptive parents so that they can kind of learn from each other. Is there an international central authority version of the play date so that they can learn from each other on how best to approach some of the challenges of being a central authority?
Thank you for the question. The convention really establishes really minimum standards, and in some questions you really need more interpretation and you need to develop domestic legislation. For example, it just says the birth mother should give her consent after the birth, but is this 1 month, is this 1 hour, is this 6 months? So you really need to develop further legislation in order to implement the convention. And once this is done, of course, if two countries decide to work together, they have to exchange information. They may use the country profiles that we have, they will have even more developed information, so they will need to know some kinds, how the procedure goes, who can adopt, which children can be adoptable. So all this information has to be exchanged.
Between sending and receiving, yes.
Yes, that's.
What about all the sending?
Yes, they do talk.
Receiving, do they talk to each other?
Yeah, they do talk. Europeans talk a lot because they meet each year. Well, we have the representative from Netherlands here, Jan Bromans, and I don't know. Now we are at the, I think, 18 or 19 European meeting of central authorities, so they do talk. I know there is also exchanges between Anglophone central authorities, so Australia, Canada, USA, New Zealand, and they speak 1 or twice a year. They have a conference call. So yes, there are exchanges. There's a lot of exchanges between Latin American as well. There was just a conference in Ecuador, the 31st of July, where they meet and discuss and prepare. Other regions we try also to trigger this. So in 2012, for example, we organized a regional workshop from Francophone states of origin and some receiving states as well, and we met in Senegal, in Dakar, for 1 week, and so they could speak together, share their information. It's very important. This is why I think Hans is really he really has his point when saying that it's really a pity that we can only organize a special commission each 5 years, because if we have it each less time, they can meet and exchange more information in a more frequent way.
Sí. Tengan todos y todas muy buenos días. Soy Norma Cruz de Guatemala. Yo quisiera nada más preguntar, en el marco de la convención o más allá de la convención, ¿cómo se contempló el restituirle sus derechos humanos a un niño que le fueron violentados por una adopción ilegal? ¿Cómo se hace ese proceso? ¿Cómo lo tienen vislumbrado?
First, I will try to translate the question into English. So please, Beatriz may tell me if I did understand properly. So she's Norma Cruz from Guatemala, and she's asking if the convention has any provision in order to say what happens in the case that the human rights of a child have been violated after an adoption, and what happens in those cases. Is that? Yeah? Yeah, after the adoption. The convention establishes this aim of preventing the abduction, the sale, and the trafficking in children. Here again, we will put a lot of emphasis in the need of cooperation between central authorities. For example, if there's a problem with the background of the child, or we are not sure if the child was found in the street, or he was abandoned, or the consent given by the birth parents, then there should be exchange of, the central authorities should speak together, even if it's from the central authority of the receiving state. They should say, well, look, at this point we see we are not clear, this is not working, so we should try to stop, we should prevent this adoption moving forward. So the convention has different stages, and we have what we call Article 17, which is an agreement to proceed, and it is given before the child and the parents meet. So it is at this point where all the information about the child, and so if we see something is not going on, we should stop the adoption at that point and not move forward. In some case, if it's possible, that will be the best way of doing it, because the matching on the children and the parents do not know each other. So we should try to stop the adoption at this point and really look if we can find a solution at that point. In some cases, it may happen that it will be afterwards they meet. Again, here is the cooperation with the different states, with as well the accredited body or the other different authorities, that they should speak, and if possible try to see what do we do for that case, and then try to find the best solution for the child. So these are like the different points where it will be Article 17 before the child and the parents are known, and then the problem may be if all this appears after the child has been adopted. If the convention and all the adoption procedure has been really well applied, really have different barriers that will prevent this to happen. But of course, it may happen. And again, here, together and decide first, what do we do with the child? When the child is not adapting to the family, but it is in the case of, it is in the case before the child has been adopted in the receiving state. Let's put it in. In some Asian states, the child is adopted in the receiving state after a period of altogether. So you can stop that adoption receiving state and the child and the parents get to, for these specific cases where the adoption has not been pronounced, you can already do something. But for other cases, and it is in the majority of states that the adoption decision takes place in the state of origin. And then afterwards, then again, it will be, we will try to recommend the cooperation between the different states. We have been working with an expert group to try to address these illicit practices, really to prevent them, and in the case that they occur, to exchange information and see how we can deal with that. It has to be from case to case. There's not like a specific provision. When the adoption has been done, there's not a specific provision to that the child will go back, or it is not really specified on the convention what we will do afterwards. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And of course, the new approach of the convention is that the cooperation of the two, that there is cooperation between the two states even before the adoption takes place or the adoption may proceed. So all the emphasis should be put in a much earlier stage than it used to be without a convention, where you had an adoption in the country of origin and then later on a recognition or non-recognition, etc. No, the two countries are from the beginning involved. Hence the importance of preparing the adoption on both sides very, very thoroughly. And then you reduce the chances of abuses and failures.
Okay, we're waiting on coffee, but we have one more question. Someone with the mic here.
Yeah, I have a mic.
You
Okay.
have the mic, I'm sorry, you have the power, but we'll have more time for questions.
Sure, okay.
Later in the afternoon plenary as well. So do you have a quick question?
Yes, not really quick, but I can just defer it. Okay. I wanted to give the two of you a chance to react to the criticisms of the convention one more time. I don't know if you want to do that, but as you know, my name's David Smolin. I'm supportive of the convention largely because I think coupled with the CRC, with UNICEF, with ISS, it's the only game in town, basically. That without it, you're either shutting down or else you're unregulated. But nonetheless, the criticisms, as you know, come from two sides, and I wanted to see if you wanted to respond. On the one side, in my own country, the U.S., there's the criticism that the Hague Convention shuts down ICA, particularly Latin American context for that the numbers went way down after adoption. And there's a lot of anger against the Hague Convention. As you know, the U.S. took a long time to ratify, and I would say has not at all adequately implemented. The other side, which I think you've already heard from today, is that it creates a false seal of approval, that it over-promises that this is going to be clean, which causes countries and individuals to rely on this stamp of good practice when in fact it's completely reliant on the political will and the implementation of the countries, both of origin and receiving countries, cooperating together. And when that political will is absent, it can be misleading and can be a pathway to the abduction, the sale, and traffic and other abusive processes because of that misleading character. I think that's the criticism on the other side. So I wanted to see if you wanted to respond to the two sides there.
I'll start off. I think it's, if you look at it, it's not so much the convention which is criticized. It's a perception in both cases. There is a perception that since the adoption convention was ratified finally by the US, numbers went down. But how come? Is there, why should there be a relation? Why don't people think a little bit more about trying to explain what happened? For instance, China ratified the convention in order to enable China to allow children to be adopted abroad. Without the convention, they might not have done that. So I don't accept for a second that argument unless people give me reasons why there is a connection. Simply to say, here, at some point we ratified the convention, at some point numbers came down is not convincing at all. Even if it were convincing, then it's only half of the argument, because we also know that numbers of adoptions in country went up. So one of the benefits that it stimulated in-country adoptions. And is that bad? Don't we want families for children? Or do we only want deal to? Yeah, that's how you look at it. The convention is a legal instrument. It provides certain duties two states, duties to protect children, and countries just should implement those duties correctly. Now, if they don't, or if they then that leads to an incompletion. It has to do with the insufficient implementation of the convention. So, means of support would be given to within developing countries, enabling them to restore a good family care system within that country. But that's a huge task and plus investments. And solidarity and goodwill.
I fully agree with what Hans has said. I think as well that we can this convention only on inter-country adoption. It's really on child protection. We can train, we can work with the central authority, go and check the adoptability. We still have the same problem. And regarding the question that was put before, I think we have to differentiate between the convention and the implementation, and it's very important. I think that the convention is set, and it's only minimum standards. We should try to raise those standards. That's very important. And when, for example, we visit, it was the case 2 or 3 years ago with Hannah, we went to Mozambique. Mozambique doesn't do a single inter-country adoption, and we were there because they had some requests and they didn't know what to do, and they were saying, well, if we join the convention, are we going to have more pressure? One of the questions that we always get is, if we join this convention, do we have to do inter-country adoptions? Because this question is looks very simple, but it's not clear to anyone. Not clear to the state of origin, but as well not clear to the receiving state. And our answer is clear in the Guide to Good Practice. If you are party to this convention, you don't need to do a single inter-country adoption. The problem is once you go into our website, and then you have a website, and you have an email address, and states of origin are really trying to, because the demand for inter-country adoption is still rising, so they take contact, and then they start putting pressure. So it's very important from a first moment saying, well, okay, I may join this convention, but I'm doing, for example, only a limited number of inter-country adoption, and I only want to work with 3 partners, and I do already have those partners. You have to be strict. On the other hand, we are not here working in The Hague like this, and we know that inter-country adoption is linked with politics, it's linked with diplomacy, and it's not the first time that we know that a country goes there and says, well, okay, if you do inter-country adoption with you, then you may have some assistance in some other way. So this is why as well we set up this expert group on financial issues, because it's this link sometime between the inter-country adoption and developmental aid. So it's sometimes it's the only way to help those children, but it creates this dependency. So it's a very difficult area, and from myself, I think that we really have to work on this child protection, but we also have to work in try to prevent more abuses, because it's being difficult to close down some countries where there's abuses, but it's even more difficult to try to start working again once all these abuses have started. So how do we say, okay, we have the necessary guarantees? So this is a really difficult step to move forward, and that we are in several countries at this moment examining. So it's really a challenge. And if I may, just a last thing, and that was something discussing with William when I started working at the PB, because I was very much impressed by the way that we were getting criticism from both sides. So when we go to the USA, they don't want to see me. With Hannah, we went last year to a conference on surrogacy, and once you mentioned, not another 193 Hague Convention, so we were very much criticized and say, okay, something going bad. But on the other side as well, so I was like, And with William, I don't know, maybe he wants to say something. We'll say. Well, if both ends are criticizing, maybe that we are doing quite where we should be. So I don't know if we wants to comment on this, but it was what I try to keep in mind.
Allow you to do that at a later point, maybe, or both Hans von Loon and also Laura for stepping in there. We'll be back for plenary at the end of the day, so we'll also have more chance to follow up for those of you I know had your hands up and didn't get a chance to ask questions. Let's go up to the atrium, and then in 15 minutes we're to start our introductory sessions with our different thematic areas. So coffee is upstairs in the atrium.